Welcome to the jungle. Welcome back to Mountaineer Report here, the jungle that is West Virginia Sports Now and covering the Mountaineers. Mike Asti, Luke Blain about to join me here in a moment. It's been a week or so since we did one of these shows, but I was traveling. We had a lot going on, and now we are back again with another episode of Mountaineer Report, made possible again by WVSN and available everywhere you get your podcasts. We are going to touch on our thoughts on the state of the Mountaineers football program and if this is rock bottom for Rich Rodriguez's second tenure. He hopes this is bottom. Is this going to be bottom? And then also the rest of the season, our thoughts on next year, maybe why this season has been the way it's been, the excuses that Rich Rodriguez levied, and our thoughts there and how valid they are. And then Big 12 Media Days for men's basketball means the season is about to tip off here. We are very, very close to Ross Hodge debuting as West Virginia men's basketball head coach and the debut of that on the basketball side of things. Maybe a better year one debut than what Rich Rod is experiencing right now with the football program. So, Luke, it's been a minute. I've been talking through text and, of course, working on the site, but been a minute for one of these shows. So happy to be talking to you again. And I guess on the jump, I'm sure you heard what Rich Rod had to say after the UCF blowout loss. And then even throughout the week now, leading up as we're speaking into the TCU game, they're back home. It feels like it's been forever since the Mountaineers have played a home game, that he hopes that losing to UCF the way he lost is rock bottom for his second tenure. And the difference of that loss that probably feels like bottom in comparison to the other blowout losses, that's a program that's dealing with a similar year one, a similar former coach that's now back again, once again trying to get back to glory. They didn't spend that much more. The big donors in Florida, despite being a bigger state, to make it clear to everybody, the big donors there, they throw money to UF, FSU, and Miami, not UCF. So per capita, they're not getting that much more than a smaller state would get. They have their own challenges, and yet, despite dealing with year one, financial issues, and a transfer portal roster, they shellacked the Mountaineers, leading you to believe that even UCF is further ahead than WVU in its progression. Rich Rod doesn't believe that, but what are your thoughts on that loss and what Rich Rod has had to say so far?
Well, I think this goes to show just how truly behind, and you kind of touched on this, but just how truly behind WVU football is when it comes to building a team that can compete in the Big 12. And I think, you saw it with UCF, a whole lot of transfers on that team. Like you said, kind of, we talked about it. What's old is new now for them. They're doing the same thing. And, I guess you could kind of use that as a measuring stick. I mean, it's not like UCF was having a great year before this game. And I mean, they came out and they dominated the Mountaineers,
Yeah.
particularly in the second half.
Both
And
winless in Big 12 play going in.
both winless. Yeah, both winless in Big 12 play. And UCF, if you would just watch that game on its own, you would think UCF was a Big 12 contender.
Right.
I mean, and that's just the effect that WVU has had on these teams so far this year.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest pill to swallow probably for WVU fans is, the thought was that Rich Rod's going to run a system that teams aren't used to facing. And it's just like, maybe they're not used to their offenses being on the field for 40 minutes a game, but I mean, it's not really working for WVU. The defense is getting tired. What was a good defense to start the year, and I believe still is, but they're not getting the opportunities that they need to because they can't find their own rhythm and they're just getting gassed out there. It's just a tragic thing all around for this WVU team. And personally, truly, I'm not really sure how you go about fixing it. Rich Rod said this was rock bottom, and I'm sure, I knew we were going to get around to that, but I mean, he said he hopes this is bottom. I don't know. I don't know how you.
That's my next question then, off the reaction.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have lost on the road to a similar program, a similar situation. I was a little surprised they ended up losing by 30 plus points, and it was 14-7 at halftime So West Virginia went into the locker room with some momentum. They were building something. They were in the game. And then actually a colleague of mine sitting next to me in the press box literally said, we're going to find out who's going to win this game, how this is going to go, and which program's really ahead within the first minutes of the second half. And within those first minutes of that second half, it couldn't have gone worse for the Mountaineers. UCF went out there and scored 3 touchdowns in like 5 minutes. And then the game was over. And then it looked like West Virginia kind of quit, certainly defensively, and they had no chance. And then it got really, really ugly. And then that's what Rich Rod and Zach Alley talked about this week, that unlike the other blowouts, where maybe they were mismatched but put out a solid effort. Like, I even think a solid effort against BYU. I think that was a solid effort against a better team with a coach that's been there forever. That was a legit veteran roster that is contending this year. That was even losing that game, I don't think the fans needed to take that loss as the end of the world. There were some positives from that loss. But against UCF, there's no positives there. And it looked like the players were loafing. It looked like the players were not bringing you that hard edge mentality the coaches want. For the first time, even in the blowouts, the coaches said that watching the UCF film, they thought the team really was loafing and kind of quit, where they didn't see that in the other blowouts at the end of those games, even when they did lose by multiple scores. So that was a big deal. But yeah, you asked it, I'll ask it, I'll throw it back. Do you think this is currently rock bottom for the second tenure of Rich Rodriguez? He hopes this is bottom. He didn't say it is bottom. He says he hopes it is bottom. Hope is a recipe for disaster, some say. But do you think this is bottom? If it gets worse than this, his tenure is not going to last too long.
No, I would have to agree. I was thinking about that earlier, and it's just like, I don't know how much you have to improve next year to be truly confident in the Rich Rod tenure at this point. Because I mean, do you give it like do you kind of give it if he looks like it maybe a year one Neil Brown team next year? Because let's face it, Neil Brown, I don't think that Neil Brown ever had a stretch of games this bad as what
No.
WVU is going through.
Year one with
Easily
Brown
no.
wasn't this bad. No, not at
No,
all.
never.
Couple was bare there. There was no transfer portal. 100%.
Yep, and listen, I'm
100%.
not going to say they should have kept Neil Brown around. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is that WVU is way behind schedule based on everything that's happened, even in the transfer portal era where you have the roster turnover, things like that. We know they're behind schedule because we just watched them get throttled by a team that is almost in the exact same situation as they are. And it's just like, for the bottom of the Big 12, which they are at currently right now. And, I do agree with you. There were some positives with the BYU game. There was room for growth, surely. But to go from that game, and it looked like Wilkins had some bright spots in that one, and then you go to Scotty Fox in the next one, I don't know how you try to build any sort of consistency with the way this team is going. So in a roundabout way, I do want to say, I think that this may be bottom because I don't know how much worse it gets than this. But I also can't confidently put my stamp of approval that it's going to get better as the year goes on because I haven't seen any results from this team that indicates otherwise. It looked like they took a step in the right direction against BYU. And then you go into the bye week where you should be more together, cohesive, have some more flow with you, and then this one happens. I mean, after the first half, granted, WVU, you mentioned it, they had some momentum going into halftime, and then it just evaporated while they were in the locker room for 15 minutes somehow. And it's just, I can't, it may be rock bottom, sure, but I can't I can't sit here and confidently say that I believe it'll get better than what we're seeing right now this year.
It's hard to be confident it's going to get better, but I guess I'm confident to say that this should be bottom because if this is not bottom, again, the tenure is not going to last long, and it doesn't feel like it can get much worse than this. And I think the other perplexing issue is, which was talked about a lot this week after the game, once the dust settled for a few days, especially from the players, Jordan Walker in particular mentioned this, that they felt they did practice well and do work during the bye. You almost, Luke, would prefer them to say, no, we didn't bring the energy. we somehow got, lost. This issue occurred with our family. Somehow we weren't focused. We let it get away. If we played them again, it would be a closer effort. They're saying they did everything right. And then all of a sudden in the game, it doesn't happen. Jordan Walker literally admitted that when they watch film, the mistakes they make during games, they do not make during practice. I asked Zach Alley about if he agreed with that, and then what do you do with that scenario? Why is that the case? He kind of danced around it. He kind of refuted it a little bit by saying that they only show them the film of things they want them to work on from the game, on mistakes they make on the game, and when they do it right. So if they do mess up in practice, they don't always see it, but maybe they need to see more of that film than if they're holding that back. But that's almost more concerning, that they have the potential according to themselves, and they're doing the right thing. It's not like they're dogging it or they don't care. And then they get into games and they're making simple mistakes that any good team, even bad teams, shouldn't be making just for the level of football that they're at. And Rich Rod is a borderline Hall of Fame head coach. He's been around for 30 years to success. Zach Alley was hired by Oklahoma for a reason. They could hire anybody they wanted. He's an up-and-coming solid defensive coordinator that I still think is a good coach and could be a future head coach. It's hard for me to imagine that they're going into every single week in practice and they're just, punting the practice and they're not teaching them anything and they're not doing their jobs. You have to imagine they're doing their jobs and beyond of what we actually get to see, but it's not going into the games. And then to lose that way to that team feels different and is different than the other losses. He mentioned that it's bottom. But before we get to what we expect and what needs to happen next year, we already see some people in the chat here as we are streaming this before recording it and then getting it onto the podcast feed. Again, Mountaineer Report here, West Virginia Sports Now, available everywhere you get your podcasts. Luke Blain, Mike Asti. As I want to touch on why maybe we're here, because Rich Rodriguez, it almost feels like a little bit that he has a Rolodex out there, that he was promoting the program, how excited he is to be back, and how you can win right away in this era. It's unlike it was 20 years ago. It's unlike even what Neil Brown had to start with. You got a transfer portal now. You can win right away. You can go worst to first. He brought up Kurt Snetti and what he did at Indiana right away. And Rich Rod said all offseason, I don't want to do 3-8 like I did 20 years ago. We're going to win right away. Clearly, they're much closer to 3-8, even if they might not even have 3 wins, than they are to, maybe it'll be worse, than they are to contending right away. But now he's letting that Rolodex open. He's showing everybody his cards and providing the excuses, really, which is what they are, to why maybe we're here. And saying that they wanted to bring in other transfer players, but they lost out due to money. He's also even now admitting, when he totally rebuffed this at the time, that there were players that left from Brown's roster that he also wanted to keep, but then lost them out due to money or other circumstances. When at that time, if you recall, he pretty much brushed his shoulders off and said, I don't care. Anyone who doesn't want to be here, we're not going to try to persuade you. And I know how some of those meetings went, talking to even the families of some of those players. And he wasn't really offering them a great sales pitch. A lot of it was, well, maybe you'll get your starting job back. Maybe you won't. He really was making them fight for it. And they ended up leaving. But now we're trying to saying he wanted to keep them. What do you make of all of that? Are any of those excuses valid? Do you like hearing this from Rich Rod and him being honest right now? Or does this seem like a lot of excuses when it's counter to what he said all off season and even before the season kicked off?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a pessimist, but I felt like the writing was on the wall the entire time. And,
Okay.
from the moment that he said, "I'll go out there and play 5 quarterbacks,"
Right.
that is just the reddest flag you could ever ask for,
Right.
is talking about playing this many. And, he's stuck to his word. I mean, Max
When you
Brown's got
have
limited
5
snaps.
quarterbacks, you
Yeah,
don't
you
have
have
one. You don't have
yeah,
one, though.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, and now that count is dwindling from injuries and things like that. We now know Nico Markiel's going into the portal. I just I don't know. I certainly don't think it's a good look to swap to, "Oh, well, we actually wanted some of Neil Brown's players," after like you said, kind of toting the mentality that, whoever doesn't want to be here, go somewhere else and we'll work with people who want to be here, which really I do believe is the right mentality in that situation. I'm a firm believer that, you
Right.
want players who want to be in a certain place and play for a certain coach and play in a certain type of system.
Right.
But to then kind of double back on it after the season's going to crap, you just can't do that. You have to stay consistent, you have to stay firm. And expectations were high for Rich Rod. Expectations were probably a little bit too high for Rich Rod.
You could argue
But
that.
this
Yeah.
but this is not the time to double back and be like, oh well, actually, we I mean, it just I don't know. Part of me makes it think about Trey Lathan getting his revenge game with Kansas, and I just thought that was kind of funny.
That was
But
funny. Yeah. And
he
he
got
didn't
an
he didn't
interception.
name Rich Rod did not name names. So people can
Exactly.
speculate.
You can
I know
speculate.
I know how, for example, the Hudson Clement meeting went. I know that he was a player that Rich Rod basically did tell, and he had a lot of family reasons why he transferred and left, and obviously that was very polarizing amongst the fans. But people thought he would fit into the Rich Rod hard edge culture. He'd be a Rich Rod type of player that worked his butt off and became a star. Maybe he would have been. Maybe Rich Rod's talking about him. Maybe he's not. He won't admit who he's talking about. But I do know how that meeting went a little bit, because I do know that he kind of told him and a few others, hey, I know you were starters with Brown. I can't guarantee you anything. You're going to compete for everything. You're going to have to impress me. If you don't want to be here, this is X number of dollars we're going to pay you. We're not going to go above this. We want to add incentives in and have you work for that. And, if you want to leave, then as you're saying, exactly kind of how he put it. If you don't want to play with me and you don't believe in me and you don't like hard edge, then you're not really a Mountaineer, and go ahead and leave. That was what he was saying to them at the time. And that was what he was even saying to the media at the time, that, okay, this player doesn't want to stay around. We're going to go ahead and replace them. And if you remember, the second you'd have a former player announce that they were leaving, West Virginia has a program. If not West Virginia as a program, a recruit, a transfer player would announce they're coming an hour later. And that was calculated. They were trying to send the message, hey, we're going to replace that guy. Often it was the same position. But as you're mentioning, that's fine if you want to send that message then. But now that you're 2-5, to say, oh, yeah, I know that I was telling him to compete and he had to leave, and I was saying that it was no big deal if these players left. But, in all reality, I did want to keep him. Well, Rich, if you wanted to keep them, you needed to act differently to try to keep them then, because you can't tell them, I don't really care. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, 8 months later, say, I did really care. It's
Yeah.
almost like if somebody is in a relationship and, a boyfriend or a girlfriend wants to get engaged and go to the next level. You've been together a while. You kind of dance around it. You never want to commit and do that. You eventually get broken up with because you won't commit. And then 8 months later, when that person is now in another relationship, you to text them and say, now I actually would get engaged. I wanted to do it the whole time, but I just, back then I just didn't make it happen. But I really wanted to, and I would marry you now that I'm seeing you date somebody else. Like that doesn't work. And
Yeah.
some of those players are having success. You mentioned Trey Lathan. Some are not. Hudson
Yeah.
Clement's not having more success after West Virginia. There are some that are not
Yeah.
having more success. Some made a good decision for themselves, and some you could argue maybe made a poor decision. And there are some that Rich Rod did in terms of transfer additions that he brought in from the outside. I know there are some players he did cut. He did sit down with after bringing it in and saying, I don't think it works out with us and you're best to transfer. They didn't all screw him over. There were players that were cut. He was open with that as well. That's also true. But now to say, oh, I would have kept some of these guys does seem a little bit hard for the fan to digest. The other end of it is, which I also want to get your thoughts on, separate from the players he wanted to now apparently keep. He also said that there were players that were outsiders that he evaluated as players that could help the team that he wanted to bring in, but then lost out due to finances. Before I toss it to you, I just want to add this part of it. Here's what's a fact. A fact is, and it's not where it needs to be at all, finances need to be better. But regardless of where they're going to be, where they are in 2025 and where they were in the offseason, here's a fact. The NIL money and the money for his staff, Zach Alley and all the coaches, higher than what Neil Brown had in 2024. That is a fact. That team got Brown fired and made at least a bowl appearance and then lost the bowl at 6-7. Year before, Brown won 9 games. Now, that team had a little bit of money for sure, but I don't know if they blew through it or what happened. But I don't know Ren Baker as a liar, and I'm not in any way calling him one, but we were told to the media multiple times that the financial situation because of full rev share would be improved and would no longer be this detriment and anchor to the program. Rich Rod is now saying that the finances is why they lost out on some players. So there's a couple about faces here, and it does feel like that either we were sold a bill of goods or we're now getting excuses in the aftermath.
Yeah. Well, it goes right back to the point of, yeah, we're fine with these guys leaving. We don't need them. And then going, well, if we had more money, we could have kept them and been better. It can't be both. It cannot be both. And at this point where we are in the state of college athletics, players have more autonomy over where they go, who they play for, how much they get paid than they ever have. And I'm personally all for it. I do believe college players, you have this talent, teams are going to be making money off of you, then you should be able to have a say into where you get to play. And, that's a different argument for a different day, but it's just the reality that we're living in college athletics. And players don't just want to go to where they want to be, they want to be where they are wanted. So if you go into these meetings and say, yeah, well, you just have to earn your way, either this or that. Like you said, I do love this. Listen, being from small town West Virginia, I love that marriage analogy because that is just that's a reality that people don't understand sometimes.
Yeah, well, I wasn't even making it so much West Virginia, just in general. But
well,
yes,
hey,
I guess
no,
it fits.
I'm just saying I've seen it.
We've all seen it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but to then it's like, what's the issue here? Is the issue that you're letting them go? Is the issue that you don't have the money for them? Is the issue like I'm feeling like I'm being pulled in so many different ways when it comes to reasoning as to why this team isn't as good as it could be. And I mean, I love the hard edge mentality, but in the situation where you're in a power conference, and I said this in the preseason, I didn't feel confident in WVU football because of how many players without this experience that they were bringing in. And now here we are. I mean, WVU has 2 wins, none of them in the Big 12, and one of them's an FCS team, and the other one was a miracle because they let Nico Markiel throw the ball. So it's just, I can't really pin down exactly what to make of why this team isn't as good as it could be.
Yeah. And I do think most of us, even when Rich Rod was saying we got to contend in the Big 12 by November in year 1, etc., that most of us are rolling our eyes thinking, okay, that's a little bit much for year 1. But even the most negative Mountaineer fan or media member or, prediction out there, most were giving them better than what it's been so far as well. I mean, the lowest prediction on our media poll before the season was 4-8, and that was only by one person. And it's not a guarantee they're getting to 4 right now. It looks like that's hard pressed to happen. And I mean,
tell me where you see 2 wins.
Right.
I can't tell you.
And even if you get there, the fact that they've lost so many games in blowout fashion is also another issue. And I do think most people probably thought that by the end of the year, by the middle of the year, even if it's not a contending season, you would start seeing some life to then hope for next year. Maybe if we were covering UCF, that's what they're talking about right now. The UCF media, and that's what they were saying in the press box. Our season's not going well. They were also sold a little bit of a bill of goods from Scott Frost that, hey, we're going to do this right away. People don't legitimize our title from before. I think it's legit. We're going to prove it by doing this in the Big 12, even though we haven't won before, etc. And then you get into the season and they're not proving any of that. They're delegitimizing the past when they were a group of 5, and they're losing in the Big 12. However, now they can at least go from the West Virginia game and say, well, here's an example of us clicking. Here's an example of a program that we're at least ahead of. Here's an example of a positive direction. We're not maybe even going to make a bowl this year, but maybe we have something to play for the rest of the year. Maybe they could. They have 4 wins now. At least they're ahead of West Virginia is probably the conversation right now, and it kind of was in the box. West Virginia doesn't even have that. So I do think this season's unfolding worse than even the most negative person expected it to unfold. I think people almost get annoyed by that I do this too much, but I'm holding people accountable to what they say. And Rich Rod, often unprompted, would throw out these big, bold claims and predictions of what was going to occur right away. And sometimes it would even trickle down to the players. Some of them throughout the spring and fall would say, "Why did you come to West Virginia?" "Oh, because I want to win right away." And Rich Rod said, "We're going to win right away." All right, well, I hope you do. And then you get into the season and they're not. And the only defense is, unlike UCF, who is maybe just struggling in general, West Virginia has been incredibly injured this year. UCF has their starting quarterback and starting running back still. West Virginia does not have their starting quarterback and starting running back from week 1 right now. They've gone through 5 quarterbacks. Starting running back on the Doak Walker Award watch list hasn't played since week 2. Jaden Bray hasn't played. Preston Fox has missed games. They've had linemen miss games. They've had injuries galore. So, because of all the injuries, before we get into what else Rich Rod said, do you feel like the injuries provide you any type of optimism and any type of legit excuse, especially when you're comparing the two similar situations with UCF? Rich Rod can at least say, we don't have the team that I recruited to be playing right now because of all the injuries, which he can't control. Does that buy him any legitimacy to the excuse at all for you, or do you just not want to hear that?
I think to a certain degree, yes. My complaint with that is even whenever Nico Markiel was healthy, they were shoehorning him into a system that wasn't working for him.
Sure.
And Jaheim White made plays before he got hurt. But also, the run heavy offense, the running back's gonna get hit a lot. And that's been happening so far.
Yeah.
We know that Edwards is out for the
Edwards
year
out.
now.
You got one
So
game at
they
Edwards, like maybe
yeah,
one
yeah,
game
no.
and 2 carries against BYU. Yeah.
And listen, WVU fans are going to remember that name for a long time because of
Yeah.
what he did in the backyard brawl.
Sure.
But I think, looking at this season as a whole, I mean, in UCF, how much would it have really helped to have Jaheim White out there? I don't know. Jaheim White is a great player, and I'm all about him. I'm happy he'll be back for WVU. I do enjoy watching him play, but is he shoot, how many points did they lose that game by? Is he turning this WVU offense into scoring 32 points more?
Yeah, and I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I get that. I think the counter would be, I don't know if you can apples to apples compare that just off the current box score, because if he was out
Right.
there, what they would say as a program and what Jaheim White would probably say is our offense would have clicked sooner. We would
Yeah.
have been maybe tied instead of 14-7, it might have been 14-14. The issue with West Virginia's quarterbacks and why they get sacked so often, and UCF actually set a record with 8 sacks in that
Yeah.
game, the best sack output they put out in 25 years of their program. Jaheim White being there would probably help the offensive line that has really struggled. He would alleviate some of that. He'd make it easier on the quarterbacks. They wouldn't have to get all their rushing yards from the quarterback position. It'd be harder to scheme. There would be a myriad of things that would be different that I'm sure Rich Rodriguez would say would allow that game to be different. They may still lose, but it probably would just be a different game plan for Scott Frost, a different dynamic to the game. So I don't know if you can just say, well, Jaheim White scores you a touchdown or 2 a game, so you add 14
Right.
points, and it still doesn't get you to tie them. But the whole thing would be different. Would they win? I still think they might be 3 and have 3 and 4 instead of 2 and 5 or whatever. It might be a little better, but him being out there is the biggest loss, even more so than
Yeah.
Nico Markiel, because Markiel didn't fit Rich Rod's system. I do think that even if Markiel didn't get hurt, they probably would have moved off him anyway, because they don't want to cater to him system wise. They want to do what they're doing. He doesn't fit it. They figured it out eventually, but with Jaheim White, they would have absolutely handed him the rock 25 times a game, and it might have been a different story. He would have been a harder tackle. Maybe we wouldn't have had the Edwards experience, but Jaheim White's proven that he can do it against Pitt as well. So
Right.
that's a big loss. I mean, that's a Doak
It
Walker
is.
Award watch player that did not, I mean, he didn't even play half of the Ohio game. He got hurt in the middle of the Ohio game.
Yeah.
So I don't want to make that the excuse, but that is
Right.
the one legitimate part. And the offensive line struggling has honestly been the biggest deal, maybe even more
Yeah.
so than every other skill position struggling. But everything that could go wrong has gone wrong this year.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. So yeah, I am starting to rethink that one a little bit. I do think, this team I think definitely would be more competitive, especially from an offensive standpoint with Jaheim White, because ever since he went out truly, that's when the offense has
Yeah.
gone just down the drain. I think, like they were able to string some drives together whenever Jaheim White was out there since like the first half of the Ohio game or whenever it was that he got out of there.
Right.
It hasn't looked pretty a lot of the time, minus some drives for the backyard brawl. But I just don't know. I think my biggest concern is I don't know how much. I like what you said. Like maybe they're 3-4 instead of 2-5.
Right.
I think that's probably the ceiling. I just can't confidently say, oh, if they had this player back, that would fix so many more problems than I would probably guess right now, and they've had some receiver injuries, but I think the biggest problem is that Cam Vaughn's still out there and you're not throwing to him. I mean, you're
Yeah.
sending him downfield. You
Yeah.
either have quarterbacks that can't get the ball to him, or, just flat out missing him, or you're just not drawing for him. Cam Vaughn's still there. You still have some other good players that are out there, and you still have Rodney Gallagher. He's out there running routes, and you just can't get the ball to him. I think the biggest problem right now is the quarterback position, I'd say, and just the fact that there's no consistency there. You have to be able to build, and when it felt like they had some consistency there, when it felt like Malik Wilkins or Khalil Wilkins, excuse me, was out there making plays,
Yeah.
they went away from him.
I know. I mean,
I don't know.
yeah,
I just don't.
I was shocked. I was shocked that they started Scotty Fox at UCF.
Yeah.
Almost nobody nobody. I mean, that was one that almost nobody was. Everyone pretty much was like, I expected to be Khalil Wilkins. It made sense. He was showing a spark at BYU. Rich Rod was giving him all the excuse under the sun, even saying it was a tough environment. I think he played well.
Yeah.
He had 2 weeks to prepare, and from what I've heard, that they were even thinking Khalil Wilkins early in that week and kind of got away from it and then flipped it maybe the day before because they're giving him shared reps and then just got impressed by Scotty Fox. I could argue, and again, I'm not a coach here, they might have overthought the damn thing.
Yeah, they
Because
might have.
even if you look just in the UCF game only, Khalil Wilkins had his issues. He still looked better than Scotty Fox in the UCF game, just that game. The offense clicked a little bit better. He did provide a little bit more of a spark. But I think, to be fair to whatever debate exists between people that want Fox, want Wilkins, it's becoming clear to me, and I'd imagine one will probably be there. They're very young. I'm imagining they're going to compete with a veteran in this coming off season. For me, it looks like neither one of them are the guy. At this point,
Yeah.
it does look like neither one of them are going to be the guy whenever they do contend in the Big 12. Neither one of them are going to be the next Pat White, and neither one of them are going to be the next great quarterback that Rich Rodriguez can brag about whenever he maybe is inducted in the Hall of Fame. It does not look like he's going to be standing up there talking about Pat White, Robinson, Tyler Huff, and Khalil Wilkins or Scotty Fox. Probably not. It's probably going to be somebody else they're going to bring in, or maybe it'll be a recruit if he's there enough years to use that guy. It just does not appear to be either one of them. They are not providing enough of a spark, showing enough, went out there, and even though there's speed and they can run and they can be dual threats, they got to have more of a passing touch to be able to do this. I understand he's not going to run the Nico Marchiol favored system where he was a better passer but couldn't really do the dual threat thing as well, but they got to give you more through the air. There's almost no threat of the air at all. And I do think that even though you should use Rodney Gallagher more, why the hell not? He's been there 3 years. They use him a little bit, but I still would like to see him more. Cam Vaughn was on a lot of national watch lists before the season. I'd like to see him more. Honestly, this was a joke in the press box in recent weeks. Their best play really is just try and can Von deep and hoping for a pass interference, and they get it a lot of the time. That was
Yeah.
some of the best plays. Like, I would just try it and see if you get that call, but it's hard to even get it to them because either the ball was overthrown, or it's underthrown, or it's a freaking duck that then it leads to an interception. And just when you start liking Khalil Wilkins, even against UCF, you start liking Khalil Wilkins when he came in. They started building momentum. They finally scored. You start liking him, and everyone's saying, okay, he should have started, but now they're going to have a chance in this game. Then he would throw a duck out there. So neither one of them give you enough to really hang your hat on here. And we've seen them enough so far that I'd be surprised if either one of them are really the guy whenever they start winning. Again, if I had to predict, I think one of them stays, one of them leaves, and they compete with a veteran in the offseason. And I do prefer Khalil Wilkins right now, even from what I've heard from coaches. But maybe Rich Rodriguez does not because he didn't start the last game. But we're now whittling it down that Khalil Wilkins is injured. He's questionable. He's only available in an emergency situation. Scotty Fox is going to start against TCU. It almost would make no sense if he doesn't. Max Brown is the only other healthy QB, and Rich Rod said he's not even fully go. So I'd imagine it got to be Scotty Fox now, and you're not going to have Khalil Wilkins there, so maybe he gets more of a game. What I do want to touch on, and maybe we'll touch on after the TCU game on the next show, on how maybe you handle the QB situation moving forward, see what he does there. I imagine Max Brown's going to play a little bit. You got to give him some time too now, even though he's not really the future either. But Rich Rodriguez admitted something else. I will say, Luke, I don't know about, coaches that you root for, the teams you root for, but even coaches I cover or teams I root for, I do prefer when a coach is honest. Like, if a coach asks me, do you want the truth or do you want, the coach speak? I'm always going to say I want the truth. But it's a lot of truth here that does feel like a little bit like too little too late now, because Rich Rodriguez is now also admitting, literally speaking, that he misevaluated some of the recruits, some of the transfers. He literally said he misevaluated. It's not about money. It's not about who he wanted to keep. He's not bringing up any of that in this regard. He's flat out saying that he misevaluated, meaning he thought this guy was going to be good. He thought this player would be better. He thought they would give them more, and they're not better. He realizes he can't get more out of that player, and he flat out misevaluated. Zach Alley agrees, and Zach Alley claims he misevaluated. He's going to take that on the chin as well. They didn't call anybody out. You can probably draw some conclusions, but do you like hearing that, or does that also bother you? Because the issue, I think, with hearing that is the advantage that West Virginia fans thought that they maybe had for this year, certainly over another program experiencing the same thing, at least against, say, a UCF, was that Rich Rodriguez is a borderline Hall of Fame coach. He's got a lot out of players before. Pat White was not a 5-star. He's been able to get 3-star players in play 5-star level in the past, even going to Jacksonville State. He's got a lot out of players that were thought to be nothing. Tyler Huff was not viewed as anything. He had 1,300 yards on the ground. So maybe Rich Rodriguez could take a 3-star and have him play like a 4-star, or an FCS kid and have him play up, or get the most out of those kids. He's now saying his evaluation was off. That almost is worse than talking about money to me.
Yeah. I do prefer honesty in most cases.
Right.
I think that in a situation like this, you look at it, there's very few I've always heard it put from coaches that it is, you want to, whenever it's winning, it's on the players, and when it's losing, it's on the coaches. And I just don't know, maybe has he mentioned anything about not being prepared? I haven't gone back and listened to the press conference yet, but to
No,
say,
he's not saying that he wasn't. The coaches weren't prepared. And the players seem to even defend the coaches. Rodney Gallagher, in
yeah,
particular, kept making it clear that I'm not saying coaches weren't preparing me. I don't think Rich Rod is saying he doubts any of his coaches or any of the players saying they doubt with the coaching staff or that they weren't prepared. But he's literally, what Rich Rodriguez is literally talking about when he says he misevaluated, for me,
yeah,
is from January to really July. he was looking at recruits. He knew he was going to have to bring in a lot of transfer players. Now, he likely, win or lose, is not going to have to bring in this many ever again. But he knew he was going to have to bring in a lot, especially once guys started leaving. And he was evaluating that talent, who was available. They brought in a lot of players, all the way from FCS, junior college. They even brought in a couple Power 4 transfers on the offensive line that has really struggled. That's the position they really did well in the portal, and that's really struggling. And Rich Rod is now saying that during that time frame, with some of those transfers, maybe he's talking about the Power 4 offensive lineman. I don't know. He misevaluated. He thought they were going to be good, and they're not good. I don't think anybody thought that misevaluation was going to be the biggest issue. I think maybe everyone thought, okay, money will be a problem, but I don't think anybody thought Rich Rodriguez's eye for talent is going to be an issue. But that's almost what he's admitting was the case from the offset.
Yeah. I think, kind of bringing it back around to that, I think that, like you said, money is one thing. And I'm going to bring this around in a roundabout way. You mentioned you mentioned the teams I'm a fan of, and one of them's the Titans, which yeah, some great coaching master classes going on over there.
Right.
But in week 1, there was a catch where a player came down with the ball, possessed it, went down, his elbow landed inbounds, called out by the officials. Titans never challenged it. When Brian Callahan was asked why he didn't challenge it, he said 1 elbow does not equal 2 feet, which is objectively wrong.
Right.
And then so he has to go out in the press conference the next day and say, hey, I was wrong.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest issue in this instance. How are fans supposed to have confidence whenever the coach has to trot himself out there and into a press conference and say the words, I was wrong? Right. How are you supposed to have faith in that? How are you supposed to have faith that you can just keep bringing in G6 recruits and then have them come in and perform well? How can you feel confident about anybody that is brought in unless it's like a former Heisman candidate or something like that? I don't know. Like, it comes down to, I don't know how you have high expectations for a team like that before they go on the field. And of course, WVU, I wasn't too impressed with how they looked in the first 3 weeks. Of course, you have the Ohio loss mixed in there, but I didn't think it would get this bad.
Right.
And then to have to put your hand up and say, hey, that's on me, accountability, that is a big red flag in moving forward. And also, I think that you kind of pointed it out, like you kind of said it, but I think that's the big point is that college football is different than it was whenever Rich Rod came in back in 02, right?
01 was the first year.
01, yeah. College football is way different. You said that he's brought in these.
Luke wasn't alive. You weren't even born yet.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right? No, I wasn't.
Yeah, I didn't.
Sorry, I had to think about that one for a second.
Yeah.
But so for like Rich Rod, he has brought in the low level recruits and had success with them in the past.
I mean, sometimes
ever since his first West Virginia tenure, how many P5 schools has he had real success at? We know Michigan was a disaster. Arizona was okay, and then that kind of slowed out.
The last Power 4 success for Rich Rodriguez of the current team that are still Power 4 was Arizona in 2014. Yeah. He won 10 games, was in the Fiesta Bowl. That's a successful season, obviously. Yeah. He did have that tenure wane off, and there was some controversy there as well. And then it had in a while, and he had, and now to be fair to him, I guess he wasn't the head coach this whole time. After that, he had to be an assistant, a coordinator, work his way back up, and then get the Jacksonville State job. The end of Arizona almost cost him his career. So he managed to get himself back to Jacksonville State, be the head coach there, build them up, win a conference title there, have success there, get them to bowl games, do more than anyone's ever done there. And then he's even admitted this. Without that, he probably wouldn't have this West Virginia job. Ren Baker probably wouldn't be hiring him now if his only success was 1 year in Arizona and then 20 years ago at WVU. That might have provided Ren Baker pause. But Jacksonville State allowed him to get this opportunity. Now, we have seen coaches go from a group of 5 level to have success at the Power 4 right away. Kirsten-Eddy, again, did it from JMU on up to Indiana, and that was not a historically sound program in Indiana. They're bringing money in. That's part of how he's doing it now. But Indiana had 3 bowl wins in 150 years. They're 3-11 still all time in bowl games because they lost the playoff game last year. And he walks in the door from JMU, brings his transfers in there and has success. He's dealing with a lot more money. They're throwing money in the pot that helps him. But we have seen it be able to be done. We've also seen, even going back to Neil Brown a little bit, you can take G5 players and elevate them and get more out of them. We have seen players, Beanie Bishop started his career at a group of 5, went to Minnesota, didn't have success there, he ended up becoming consensus All-American. Hawkins was a fan favorite at West Virginia after being a lower level player. There are some examples of that occurring. So it's not to say that Rich Rodriguez should only go after 5 stars and power. I know fans want this, but the risk of doing that is you end up with nobody. Because if you're not going to get those players, you're not going to have enough of them, and that's just not going to work. I do believe that Rich Rodriguez and Zach Alley in particular still do have an eye for talent. That has to be what you're banking on. They still have an eye for talent, and I do prefer my coaches, to be honest, whether I'm a fan or whether I'm covering, than not. Accountability is nice as well. I mean, I like Callahan said, you're sitting up there. Would you feel worse with somebody if he went after he was wrong and then went out there the next day and said, I admit I was wrong? He since got fired. But would you have felt worse if he went out there the next day after being wrong and said, nope, I'm still right? And then everyone was like, no, we know you're wrong. Like, you at least got to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah.
And Rich Rodriguez is now admitting when he's wrong. But again, it's still bizarre to hear because he's supposed to be a great evaluator of talent, more so than anything else. And you could also argue, Luke, if I could see with my eyes that Nico Markio was not going to be a fit for his offense, and I knew he was not going to change it, and they just were not a fit, I get Nico wanting to come back, and I get the whole thing that why not try with him? Sure. But if I could see that he wasn't going to be a fit, why couldn't Rich Rodriguez see he wasn't going to be a fit? Maybe Rich Rod should have had one of those harder meetings with Nico Markio. Maybe in the offseason he should have sat Nico down and said, I know you want to come and you're buying into Hard Edge, but I don't think you're a fit for me, and just not allowed him to come. That happens all the time around the country too. But he brought him back. So even though he's not a fit, and they were probably going to cut bait anyway, even if he didn't get hurt, and he did really get hurt, you still can blame Rich Rodriguez for, if he's going to sit there and say, well, he wasn't a fit, and that's why I'm telling him to leave, and he's not saying this, but I know he said it behind closed doors, then you still can say, Rich Rod, you're still responsible for having him be your day one starter. Like, if he doesn't fit you, why did it take you 3 weeks to figure this out? You're the godfather of this offense. Those are little things that just, it's weird to hear now. So with all of that said, what needs to happen for you next year? I put a poll out there on the site on how many years you want to give Rich Rodriguez in terms of time to fix this. I can tell you what I am almost sure is the case. He's not going to get 6-7 years. He's not going to get Neil Brown's time frame, whether it's fair or not. He's not going to get that long of a time frame. I'm sure he's going to get more than this year. He's not going to get fired after this year, even if they don't win any more games. How much time do you think he fairly should get? And what do you want to see next year to feel comfortable that all of these admissions of guilt have been rectified?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that majorly needs improvement is I think there needs to be more cohesion on the offensive side of the ball. You have to have sustained offensive drives. You have to take some time off the clock as much as you like to run that hurry up offense. I do think you need to be able to take time off the clock, give your defense time to rest, and adjust your game plan to your players. That's a huge problem I have with the handling of Nico Markiel is, I've hammered that, I've beaten that dead horse a
He just
lot.
won't do that. He won't even
Yeah,
answer. I
and I
see a
know.
commenter here. Why not adjust it for 1 year of Nico and then worry about next year when it comes? I hear you. He won't do that. He's not
We
going to do
asked him
that.
that.
I mean, I legitimately asked him. His
I
exact
think you
quote
asked
was,
him that, yeah.
"Yeah, the quarterback in my system always has to be a runner. Run first." So he's not going to do it. He's not going to do
No,
it.
it's not going to happen. I think you need to go out there and look convincing against your FCS and your G5 or G6 now opponents. I mean, shoot, even in the Neil Brown era, I mean, they were losing whenever that rain delay against Duquesne came along. And then that was kind of indicative of how that team did that year too.
Right.
Or what
Right.
No, that was the year that they made the Mayo Bowl, right? Yeah, never mind. But
Well, I still get your point that
you're right.
because pretty much every year against the FCS, they would toy with them for the first half and then they would pull away. And Brown did
Right.
win big in the FCS game. But yeah, that was the Mayo Bowl year. But
Right.
yeah, that wasn't an impressive win. And,
No.
but no, Brown never had 4 consecutive, and he needed to go. The tenure was
Yes.
over. I'm not saying he should have stayed. But Brown never had 4 consecutive weeks of losing by 25 plus points any of these years. Even the year that was quote unquote year 0, that he came aboard and the cupboard was bare and there was no transfer portal, and he's later admitted to me personally on a show that he would have scrapped the whole roster because he wanted to get rid of the energy vampires. Even that was not as bad as this season. Now, if Rich Rod next year ends up turning it around and they go ahead and contend, or in 2 years he wins a Big 12, because he did have a 3-8 year in 2001, and then a couple years later they were winning major conference titles, BCS bowl games, and a top 3, top 5 perennial team for years on end before he left. If that is the follow to this, way better than the Brown tenure, because they kind of were stagnant and never going to probably peak more than the Mayo Bowl year. That's why you had to cut bait. But if it's this and then this again, and then it's barely getting to a bowl eligibility, then it's a worse tenure than what Brown did.
Yeah. I think, well, you do have to get a bowl game. Like, that is just bottom line. You have to do that. I think that, so some things, offensive cohesion. I think whenever you lose games, it can't just be because you're just flat out not competitive for an entire half of football. Like, that just can't be the case. If you want to go out there and lose because the other team just makes a couple more really good plays than you, that's fine. But you cannot have these results next year. I don't know if you could, like, after this, what has been a disaster of Big 12 play, I don't know how many double possession losses you can have next year. Of course, granted, difficulty of schedule, things like that. They even gave Neil Brown the loss against Oklahoma and Texas Tech and gave him another year after that. So I think on all fronts, you just have to have a better year. And I'm willing to give the defense slack this year because they've been asked to play a lot of football. And honestly, how hard do you want to play whenever you go out there and you have your offense go -1 yards for a 3 and out?
It's hard.
Just can't. It's hard.
They don't get a break at all. I mean, the defense has not played well. Certainly the secondary has not played well. And Zach Alley has flat out said that part of our success earlier in the season is because we were not playing as good at teams. And even though Pitt's now been a winning program and they've won some games and beat Florida State, at that point they had a worse quarterback. They weren't as good. So I think without throwing anybody under the bus, he was literally saying that once our schedule got harder, it exposed us because we're not really as good. But the other end of it is what you're saying, that it's even if no way should they have gone to this level of bad.
Right.
Should not have dropped down to this level of bad. Even if they started losing games and they got exposed and they weren't as good, to get this level of bad where the secondary is almost as bad as it was last year when it was historically bad, that feels like it is an issue that you get no break. The offense is out there for a minute and a half, literally 3 and out, and then you're back out there. And emotionally, physically, you're just drained probably at that point.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a part of the game that a lot of people, I don't think, understand, is that the defense needs to have rest, especially, they're playing a complicated system. You have to think it's exhausting on the mental side. And the players have been open about that it's very complicated. There's a lot of things to learn.
Yeah.
So coming in and then just having to do that all the time. And I mean, we're seeing the effects of it. We're seeing them get UCF just dropped 45 points on this team. Like UCF.
Yeah.
Like, this
they scored
is not
11 points the week earlier, by the way. I want to make that clear.
Yes.
This same roster, UCF, lost to Cincinnati 20-11 the week before. I know the Bearcats are improving, but they've really never been great in the Big 12. And even if you think they're a good team, UCF scored 11 and then 45. They might have had a great week to practice, and maybe Frost is a better coach than I'm giving him credit. That is one hell of a jump. Hell of a jump. And the common denominator there is they played West Virginia, who I even said this during the game. West Virginia is exactly what the doctor orders for all these teams. West Virginia makes everybody look like world beaters. It doesn't mean that they are. UCF could easily turn around, Luke, and lose, and I would not be surprised at all. Because they look great against West Virginia does not mean they're going to look great against everybody else. It just
Yeah.
exposes West Virginia as being as bad as they really, really are. And I think factually speaking, they got to contend. They got to compete next year. They probably, and Bren Baker does not like putting win total bars on things. I'm sure he's going to say that in the offseason. He won't put a win total bar, but they got to get to a bowl game next year at minimum. They got to crawl to one. They got to find out how to get to one. I would imagine, off of what I even heard before his hiring everything, that Rich Rodriguez is going to get, obviously this season, obviously I would imagine even next season. I would imagine the pressure's not going to really get on him from Ren Baker on down until year 3. But if he misses a bowl game in year 2, I would still think he'll probably be back in year 3. But then year 3 is going to really have to take a jump.
Yeah.
And I would think he would not get to year 4 if year 1, 2, and 3 are all losing seasons and there's not even a bowl game out of those 3 years. I would think he might not get to year 4. I do not believe that this is any type of ceremonial, you have this Hall of Fame resume, you won those bowl games, we're honoring those teams, we're bringing you back, you're going to retire here, you won't take another job. So whatever you do, we'll run the contract out and then you go ahead and leave. No. I think they will unload him before this 5-year contract is up if he is not winning. At some point. I don't even know if it's year 1 or 2, but at some point I think they would. And if not, then that's a criticism on them because the program clearly needs to start winning. You can't just punt years to celebrate Rich Rodriguez either. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of what ifs that the fans and chatters are bringing up here. I mean, Nika Marco might have looked better if Jaheim White was out there because he would have taken pressure off. If the offensive line was better, even if you don't change the system. I agree with all of that, but that's still not the world we're living in. And I do think that even with all the injuries excuse is valid, Luke. It is. But even with all the injuries, they still should be more competitive than this. They still should be better than this. They still can't be this bad. They still can't get blown out every week. There's just an unacceptable level of bad that this season has now got to that I don't have no sales pitch for any fan to keep checking in. I mean, if I was not covering, I would not be checking in anymore probably. If we get to basketball here that we're going to close the show with. So that's kind of where it is, and we could do hours long on end on this. We're going to do more shows on this, I'm sure. We'll touch on where things actually are after seeing them against TCU because we'll see more, maybe more of Scotty Fox. Maybe we'll finally see Max Brown. The process of elimination is kind of gone now. But I do think Rich Rodriguez is going to now have an ability in front of him. I'm gonna end the football talk with a glass half full, but also a warning shot in a way. All of the obstacles that Rich Rodriguez brought up of money, there's even reports that they're actually intentionally holding money to really, really throw it down next year in 2027 when the schedule gets easier and make it rain, and they're holding $5 to $10 million. Okay, if they're doing that and Rich Rod didn't want to do that. Anything like that. So money, him and his staff did get there in late December. That does put you behind the winter transfer portal. I get all that. Maybe you misevaluated. Maybe you had to put in your culture, and it's hard to put a new culture in. It's tough to do that. What Kirstenetti did is more of an aberration, and he got a lot of money to work with, even though they never were good before at Indiana. So maybe this is more the norm. That's an aberration. Year 1's year 1. Maybe all those excuses are valid. 2026 is now going to be a season after him and his staff have been there for a year. The hard edge culture, the signs, the vibe, everyone knows about it, is going to have been there for a year. He's going to have this whole summer, season, year to recruit that high school recruiting class that he claims is going to even be bigger. Why not? There's no cap now. Sure. You don't have to rely on Neil Brown's recruits because most of these high school kids were Neil Brown's high school kids. You could put your own class together. Great. Then now you're not going to have to worry about 2 transfer portal classes because Rich Rod's complained about how that was hard. You bring in a player, then they can choose to leave and screw you. Okay. Now there's going to be one window. He's won that argument. Now there's going to be one window. Which means that it will potentially provide an easier path to make 2026 better. It'll be easier on him in recruiting. It won't be as chaotic. His culture's in there. His system's in there. Maybe he can try to bring some players back. He has literally said, this goes back to holding accountable. He has literally said in the exact same interview, in which he said that they lost out on recruits because of money. He said, but that financial obstacle has been rectified, and I've been promised that will not happen again, and we'll have more money, etc. And there's even reports they're holding back on money. All of that to say, Luke, with all of that said, and it might all be true, and it might be why next year is better. Maybe this year is an excuse, maybe it's valid, and maybe next year is going to be better. Great. If next year is bad again, and they lose again, you then lose all of the excuses that you've been levying now. You cannot claim you got there late. You cannot claim you have to administer a new culture. You cannot say that there's 2 portal windows and players left. You cannot complain about money any longer. You can no longer complain about really anything, because all of it is valid to complain about this year. And unless the whole roster gets hurt again next year, I mean, it's going to be your group. You are able to recruit them. You can't misevaluate again, and the excuses just won't work again. So as much as I think he'll get to at least year 3, if I'm Ren Baker and next year's bad and they win 4 games, and he starts in press conferences saying, oh, well, I misevaluated, or we didn't have this money, or we lost out on this kid, or it takes a while to put a culture in, or give me more time, or any of that, I then would start coming back at him with, Rich, those excuses worked in year 1. They don't work in year 2. A lot of that's been corrected. So that's the issue. There is a reason to believe next year will be better. It will be easier in the offseason for him. But if it's not, the excuses go away and they're just not legitimate. No one should want to hear them, and maybe sinks the entire tenure. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report. Available everywhere you get your podcast, and of course, made possible by West Virginia Sports Now. I do want to close up shop here, as I'm also losing my voice, and I didn't think we were going to do this long of a show, but of course, you talk football and what Rich Rod had to say, and we just get into it. But the basketball team is about to tip off here. They're about a week or so away. They got an exhibition game coming up this weekend that you're going to be covering for us. Ross Hodge has been talking. The players have been talking. They were at Big 12 Media Days, kind of saying the same thing they said throughout the offseason. What did you make out of what they said at Big 12 Media Days? I know you've been writing about it as well. We've been releasing some of those periodically. What do you, we did your expectations of this team, but what do you want to see early on in this season, even from the exhibition game on, to give you reason to believe that year 1 for Ross Hodge is not going to be year 1 for Rich Rodriguez and not go through this again?
Yeah, well, I do want to preface by saying that the more research I do, the more I watch the press conferences, the more I see the clips that they'll put out. And I think that Sunday is going to reaffirm this. I think that this WVU team I'm not going to say it has a chance to be, I think they will be good. I think they will
Okay.
be possibly really good. I don't
Okay.
know. Haven't made up my mind yet.
Okay.
So we'll see. We'll see on Sunday. But I do. So when it comes to what I want to see early, I think you have to see better play in the front court for this team. The big downfall of Darren DeVries' team last year was that they just got out rebounded. I think they got out rebounded in like the vast majority of their Big 12 matchups, and they won very few of those games in which they got out rebounded. That is a big problem. And so he did say that Brennan Lorient probably a starter. I do like that. I think you put him at the 4 and have Harlan Obioa at the 5. I think that is a very good front court duo for WVU. And I think they will play a lot of Big 12 front courts. And I think that early on, you're probably going to see some dominant play down there. You have the rebounding to back up for it. And then you have a guard, which, assuming Chance Moore takes that bench spot after what I was talking about, that well, in my predictions. So say you're swapping Brennan Lorient for Chance Moore. Chance Moore
Okay.
averaged 6.5 rebounds per game last season. That is very good for a 6'6" guard. And they have just more height all around. I mean, on average, they're an entire inch taller than last year's team was. And if you take Honor Huff out of that, who's pretty short, but makes up for it with his shooting, there is huge potential for this team to be much better in quote unquote the trenches. I'll use a football term there, but just down low in general, holding other teams in check in the post, having success in the post. I don't think you're going to have to toss the ball back and rely on one player like Javon Small to dribble around and
Yeah.
make 5 3-pointers a game like you had to last year.
Yeah.
But, assuming that the team stays healthy, I think they have good height. I like the size. I like everything about the way this roster is constructed. I really do, and I mean that. And like Ross Hodge talked about that a little bit today when it comes to players like Jackson Fields. You can play him as a 5 in a small ball lineup, and you can put him out on the wing because he shot fairly well from 3-point range last year. Had a pretty good year shooting last year. I think that there's way more diversity of play because, I mean, looking back at last year, how many big men did they have that you could put down there at the 5 and also put them outside and make a 3-pointer? Amani Hansberry, 6'8". I mean, Jackson Fields got the same kind of build, but they got to a point where they had to play Hansberry down at the 5 so much that he couldn't really, if you can let him shoot a 3-pointer, but if he misses, the other team's getting the ball.
Size was more of an issue
that was
with
the
last
problem.
year's team. Yeah, 100%.
But you
Right.
didn't have anybody who was 7 feet tall. You have that now in
Right.
Harlan Obioa. You have players who can finish down low. He's bringing in a point guard that he can trust, and I think that's probably an underlooked part of this team is that Jasper Floyd is coming in with him. So you have a ball handler and you have a post player who have played for Ross Hodge, know what he's about, and they know his system, and I'm looking for good years for them offensively and just hammering away at the defensive mindset. You don't get to commit to WVU and then under Ross Hodge and then come in and then be surprised that you're going to be asked to play good defense.
Right.
All of these players knew that going in, and they know the expectation of what's going to be asked for them from a defensive standpoint. I think that they're a very good thing, and WVU did have some success with that. There were some really good defensive stops. I mean, Darren DeVries about jumped out there for a loose ball a few times, I think. So I think that, those culminating together, I think they have higher potential for offensive firepower across the board. And I think that there is huge, huge potential for WVU, especially in Big 12 play. And I don't mean to gas them. And, I've never been that big of an optimist. You can look at my takes before the season started for football. I was not high on this team. I predicted 5-7, and I was being a bit too gracious.
Right.
But I think that this men's basketball team has a really good chance to be good and, dare I say, contend for the Big 12.
And it really is going to be how this team develops if they really buy into Ross Hodge, and it feels like and sounds like they are, into his system and into his mentality and what they do in Big 12 play. But I was not high on the Ross Hodge hire. Experience as a D1 coach, I didn't think was enough to warrant an historic program like this with pressure to finally turn this around and win again. But maybe he's the right coach because he has a similar mindset to what's working at Houston. He's even admitted that he wants to copy them. That can work to win a Big 12 championship and be a national contender. They're on the verge of winning a national title, was Houston. So he can get to that point with this mentality. Will this team do that? I'm not going to say that, but I do think in year one, it would be nice to see this team at least be a bubble team. I'm not even going to say they have to get in the tournament because last year's DeVries team should have made the tournament. They got jobbed. But even being as close as they were, they had a lot of big wins. They were hot and cold, though. They relied on one player to do a lot. They dealt with a lot of injuries. The way they got there was weird. This team maybe might even have a worse record because of the schedule. And West Virginia has had championship teams that did not have 3 top 10 wins. I mean, maybe they're not going to do that again. Maybe they won't beat Kansas and Lawrence, but they still might be a better team the way they play, and they might do better in Big 12 play. Because if you look at the Big 12 schedule and what they did under DeVries, they had those big wins early, and then it just went down the drain. And that's why they ended up not making the tournament in all reality, besides, any controversy that exists with Tucker DeVries and Bubba and all of that. But just on the court, they kind of played themselves out of it too. If they would have won 2 or 3 more of those games, they might have forced themselves to get in, even if nobody wanted to put them in there in the meeting with the committee. So can this team avoid that by how they play, and can they get better as the season goes on? You could argue that DeVries' team peaked in January and then got worse. Can this team get better? Ross Hodge's teams normally do. It feels good right now. It sounds good right now. I'm kind of warming up to Ross Hodge there now. We'll see what they do once the season gets underway. We'll also see what lineup he sticks with. But they are a little bigger. That does help. They have more scores, more than one potential 20-plus point scorer. That is a big deal. Again, West Virginia relied on Javon Small to pretty much vie for Conference Player of the Year when they were winning. And then once he dipped off of that, and teams kind of figured out that you dominate Small, you put double coverage on them, and you got the Mountaineers, that was a problem. That might not be an issue here. You can't double team Eagle staff because there's other players that are going to be able to beat you as well. And they're not Power 4 transfers like Small was, but Power 4 schools did want those kids. There's a reason why they wanted them. So again, Ross Hodge has a little bit of house money in front of him. He's not going to get fired after year one, no matter what they do, even if they have a Josh Eilert year. Renbaker's going to give him time. He's going to give him more than 1 year. But I also do not believe that it's going to be as bad as the Eilert year. I believe there's reason to believe it's going to be better, and they're going to at least be competitive and be good. They're going to have big wins. They're going to have bad losses. Expect it all. And what I will tell the fans, I know someone's going to do this. They even did it last year with DeVries. But don't come to me in game 3 with, oh, Ross Hodge got to get fired. He's got to go. Under no circumstances is anyone getting fired after 3 games in, or do I even want to hear it? It's a long season. Things change. People wanted DeVries gone after 3 games in, and then they went ahead and beat Kansas, beat Gonzaga, and obviously if he didn't leave, he wouldn't have got fired. So nothing is going to be decided after 3 or 4 games in. You got to compete more in the brawl. Pitt shouldn't be that great. Compete more in the brawl. Maybe get a brawl win. That'll be a big deal. At least Rich Rod did get that. Like, that could be a big deal for the program to hang their hat on early on. They won't have to deal with a lot of injuries early. They're getting everybody in sync, unlike Eilert's season where bad when everybody was out early on. You can gel this team. But the negative end, Luke, I guess, my last point is the schedule's a little tougher in out-of-conference play, so they could lose some of those games despite playing better. Be ready for that. The record could be worse, even if the team is better, and maybe that sets you up to be better in Big 12 play. Is there anything you want to see in particular from the exhibition game? I guess last question here, just from that game in particular, is there anything you want to see from that game? It's obviously an exhibition. They obviously should win, but even if they don't, it's an exhibition. We've seen teams win national titles. They lose exhibition games. It's not a big deal, but they're going to play basketball, and they vocally said they're sick of playing against each other. They want to play against somebody else. They beat Maryland in a scrimmage. That's something. They beat that. I mean, that was a recent Sweet 16 team from last year, even though they're a whole new team with a new coach. But they beat a similar program handily in a scrimmage. I don't know what you make of that. Nothing really. But what do you want to see from the exhibition?
Well, I think we know what to expect. I think we know that Eagle staff is going to go out there. He'll handle the ball. He'll make some shots. Honor Huff's going to drain some threes. I think my biggest point of interest is this team is because we haven't seen them play, and of course they're not playing against a Division One opponent. But I think there needs to be some looks at players like Amir Jenkins, and specifically the freshman who came up from high school early to join a Big 12 team. I mean, that's a big deal. These players are going to be thrown into the fire in their first year of college basketball, assuming they get valuable minutes, and I think Amir Jenkins will in particular. So I would like to see what happens with some of the younger guys, what they pan out like against another collegiate level team. And, I think that's my main interest because I feel like I kind of know what to expect out of Eagle staff, Honor Huff, and I am interested. Harlan Obioa post weight loss, which is very impressive, and I think they've done a great job with him, and I think he's shown some great work ethic and commitment by getting to a point where he needs to be to fit Ross Hodge's system, but. You kind of know what to expect from those guys. Those guys are in their final year of eligibility. We've seen them all over the place and throughout their careers. So I would like to see some things from the younger guys, and I think that's going to be my biggest thing to look for in this one because they should win handily. And I'm not going to sit here and say, well, yeah, they need to win the game. I think that you need to see what those guys who are going to be coming in off the bench, particularly the younger ones, what they can offer to the team.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're going to need this whole team. You're not going to
Yes.
you're not going to be able to just run it through one or two guys. But we've seen that last year, and it didn't end up working. You need to have a full cast of characters, a full team. It's going to be a long season. You're going to need to run through depth. Hodges teams normally go deep. He normally gets into the bench and has those players be contributors when they win. So that's definitely going to be something. I'd even imagine you might have the starters, the Eagle Staffs, the Brandon Lorians, the Honor Huffs, maybe not play as much as they normally would in an exhibition game. He doesn't want to get these guys hurt. They're going to play a little bit, and if they look good, maybe they don't play as much as they normally would, and maybe you see a lot more from the bench. And I would not read that much into the final score. I'm sure they're going to win, but even if somehow they don't, they're going to be trying to do things in this game that they maybe wouldn't do if they were playing a legit competition. They're trying things out. It's an exhibition game for a reason, but it's the first crack at seeing Ross Hodge at work with a Mountaineer polo on at the Coliseum in a game that doesn't matter, but matters a little bit to the fans and what they're going to watch, especially when it's going to be in a weekend when maybe the football season continues to go down the drain. So look ahead to the basketball season. I do think it should provide some optimism and better days for the Mountaineer fan base in general than what the football season has been in year one. I think Ross Hodges year one will be better than Rich Rod's year one, but we will see. And we will see what our show also entails in coming weeks, because a lot of that will hinge again on what the football team does and what Rich Rod has to say. Any more admissions, any more accountability anybody wants to take. He did say that I was being, he went into the whole Mike, you're just going down the negative path. When I straight up asked him, it's one thing to lose BYU, but what do you tell to paraphrase my question, what do you tell the fans when you're losing to a similar program in a similar situation? You're just going down the negative. Well, what I should have said, what's the positive?
Yeah.
I mean, how can I not go down the negative? But we talked some positive and mostly some negative here on this edition of the show. So that'll do it here for Mountaineer Report. Again, available everywhere you get your podcast, West Virginia Sports Now. He's Luke Blain. I'm Mike Asti. We will see how optimistic or pessimistic Mountaineer fans are after another football game, and at least seeing the basketball team together as a unit for the first time this year under Hodge.